Hello, amateurs, and welcome to episode 105 of the Amateur Rugby Podcast. Here to help soothe your Sunday morning hangover with some wonderful rugby chat about the grassroots of the game. I'm your host, Tim, and I've got another fantastic guest for you today. I don't know this guy at all, but he wrote a blog post this week about coaching in the community game, and it really struck a chord with me. He's coached rugby for 17 years, and he's also known as at Top of the Props on Twitter. So please welcome Mr. Karl Cross. Karl, how are you?
Yep, good, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you very much. Now, just first of all, well done on writing that article. But before we get into that, I'd love to know how you got into the game in the first place.
Yeah, see, my route into rugby is quite unique. I never picked up a rugby ball before I was 28 years of age, and I had this dream job of when I was young. I wanted to run my own fishing lakes. This was my dream, and at 26, I managed to achieve this. And I bought this lease, scraped this money together, and I bought this lease in Leamington Spa. And over that 2-year period that I was there, I lost a fortune. You know, I pretty much lost all my money, and
Wow.
I found myself at 28 back living in my parents' house. I was a bit lost. I was angry with everything, and this one night I went up to London with a friend of mine, and I ended up in a fight with a doorman, and I got a train back, and I ended up in a fight in the car park with someone waiting for a taxi. And during this fight, this guy bit a chunk out of my eyebrow, and the whole thing
Wow.
the whole thing was kind of chaos, and it left me sort of sitting there going, you know, what are you doing with your life? Where is it going? And you know, I was lost and I was angry, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, let's go for a drink on Saturday." Went to this pub, and there was a couple of his his friends there, and they just started playing at Chesham Rugby Club. And they said, "Oh, Sam, you must come along." And Sam said to me, "Oh, you should come." And I was like, well, "I don't think it's for me." You know, I had this vision of rugby as this posh sport that didn't suit people like me, you know. And I went along this Thursday night. I got a pair of boots, bought a pair of rugby boots. I went along on a Thursday night training session, and that Saturday they said to me, "Oh, you know, why don't you play?" You know, and I had an hour-long training session. I turned up. I played tighthead prop. The first scrum, the opposition hooker and prop got up and both punched me, and I was like, "I found my home. This is where I belong." And it was one of those moments where, and it truly was a moment where I felt at home, you know, and Chesham Rugby Club just became this place that welcomed me, and I suddenly realised what an amazing sport it was, you know.
That is an amazing story. I love it when rugby comes and is almost like the savior in situations like that. So, how did your life kind of then develop for the next few years after that?
Well, I couldn't, you know, and you say save you, and it's 100% true. It saved me. It saved me at a point where I was lost and directionless. And, you know, within a couple of years, I started to captain the second team, and I was playing regularly and just enjoying it. You know, like I said, Chesham Rugby Club was really unique at the time because it was also a rugby club that had its women's team had started pretty much at the same time as its men's team. So it was only 1989 the rugby club started. And so at that time, like 20 years ago, it had a women's team that was integrated into the club. It was just another team. It wasn't different. So when I went to clubs when that was different, it was quite a shock. It was quite strange to see this reaction to women playing rugby, you know. And so that was kind of quite strange. But like I said, I made some just incredible friendships, and I realised that it was a sport where what you put in, you got out, and I just absorbed the game, and I became obsessive, like we do with I'm an analytical person. I want to know how it works. I want to understand the game. I want to, get enthralled by it. And that's what I did. And I suppose I was 5 years playing with the second team. I had a couple of games with the first. I was a terrible rugby player. I'll be honest with you. I was a terrible rugby player, but I just enjoyed it. And I did an ACL. I snapped my ACL in one game. And that was a point where someone said to me, a guy who was coaching our women's team said, "Oh, could you come down and do some stuff with the scrum?" And that was kind of the beginning of my coaching journey, really.
Amazing. Okay, we're going to talk a lot about the coaching, but first of all, I want to know about your first 5, 6, 7, 8 games playing in the front row, having never even played rugby before. What was that like? How did you manage to analyze it, and how did you get on?
Just horrendous, It was just, I was just thrown into this thing that was just chaos, and I was like, yeah, I reckon I spent 2 years just getting turned upside down, stuffed inside out. And then I spent a year not getting stuffed inside out as much. And then slowly just, I felt I can hold my own now, and I'm okay. I feel comfortable. And then I started I love the position, hence the name. It's a fantastic part of the sport. It's so amazing. It's, I'm passionate about all of it, but that part of the sport for me was just so unique. That battle you had within a.
Completely. And as you know now with your experience, every single prop has to go through that process. They have to go through the process of getting battered for at least a good number of games before you come through the other side and you can potentially start to dominate.
Yeah. I don't think I ever dominated anyone, but I held my own all right every now and then.
Okay, in theory.
Yeah.
Okay, let's. I'd loved hearing about that. It's great to hear how people get into the game in the first place, and that's quite a unique story. So that's amazing. But let's go on to the coaching side of things now, and the article that you wrote. It's come out this week. I saw it this week. So the whole point of it, I guess, and maybe the reason why it's been written is because you've lost your spark in terms of coaching. So I just want to know how that feels, how it came about, and why do you think it sort of happened?
There's a few reasons why. I had this aspiration to coach my home club, Chesham. It was always my dream, and for reasons that are beyond my control, that wasn't the case. And I think because that was always something that was in my future plan, I can't it always was my motivation. But I mean, even speaking to you now, I realize how passionate I am about rugby. Do you know what I mean? And it's certainly coaching and the impacts it can have on people's lives, And so I start to go, oh Christ, is this a mistake? Immediately, do you know what I mean? But I'm not doing service to the people I'm coaching currently, because it's feels like a slog. And when you get into that position, you have to be honest and say, right, I need, even if it's a break for a year or whatever, I just need to step away and rediscover the bits that impassioned me in the first place, And I will find it. I'm sure within a week of the season ending, I'm going to be going, I need to be coaching. I need to be doing something,
So, I mean, this is maybe a difficult question to answer, but do you think the players you're coaching, do you think they've recognised that in you?
I'd like to think they haven't. We've had with Bletchley women for the last 2 seasons, how I got involved there. I've coached that team on and off for probably 7 years in various stages of my coaching career. And so I've got a real affinity with them, and we've had very successful times. But when I came back 2 years ago, I was asked to basically come in to help mentor some coaches coming through. And my dream was that we'd be able to hand on to 2 female coaches. That would be the ideal dream. And it was like, I'll give us a couple of sessions just to help out. And of course, 2 years later, you're deep in. And that first season, and I mention it in the blog, is we won one game, and that was pretty much luck, really. That they just, the opposition squandered 3 or 4 winning opportunities. That was the only game we won. We conceded 600 points. It was just brutal, but it was the most enjoyable season of rugby I've ever coached, because the players were just, they bought into it. And we were honest at the start. I said to them, look, you're in a league that's too tough for the experience we currently have. We had a lot of new people coming in. Women's rugby is a bit different to men. Is you tend to get a lot of, or certainly amateur level, you get a lot of people come into it who come in late in life. And that's probably why I have an affinity with that. They come in a little bit later. It's something new. It's something of a challenge. And so I knew that this was going to be a challenge. And I was upfront at the beginning. I said, I don't think we'll win a game, but we're going to enjoy it. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to try and have fun. And I made some mistakes. Don't get me wrong. I made some mistakes in trying to be too free and not say, new people sometimes need a bit more structure. And I was so anti-structure. I'd become like anti-structure that it wasn't helping them. Do you know what I mean? Because there is comfort in structure for players that are new, certainly. And
for sure.
And I was resistant to allowing that, and that was a mistake on my part.
Okay, but I think well done for spotting that was going to be the case. I think it's very brave to then go and tell the players what your observation is as well. But there must be some strong characters within your playing group to then grab hold of that and run with it and have fun with it as well. So talk to me about some of the characters in the playing group.
Well, I actually think what there was a group of players that had some tough experiences in the last few seasons. And I think they'd also lost a bit of love for it. That I think some of obviously you'd had COVID and all of that chaos that created, which is that 2-year window, which kind of just vanished out of our lives, and it had a big impact in sport, because moving on for teams that were in transition was very hard to do. Do you understand? If that makes sense?
Yeah, completely.
So I had players that I'd coached before, so they knew me anyway, and they understood where I came from and my belief in things. So they were able to support me, and there were some great characters there, and they. I can't say enough about them, of how much they made it such a joyful experience, because we'd happily going, this is the situation. This is our challenge today. We're going to try and get a try, or we're going to try and not we always, after the first half of the season, we said, right, the challenge is to not lose the games by the same score, by less. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
That challenge, and they all bought into it, and and it's quite a unique, quite a special group to do that. But
Yeah.
I had people that were really good players, and who you worry this isn't gonna be good enough for them. And they said at the end of the season, it was the most enjoyment they'd had. It was the most fun they'd had. And I put that at the center of the season, because I knew it had to be fun, because it was going to be hard.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I think obviously winning and losing a game is a very stark measure, but you've just outlined a few things there that are in between that allows players to still be competing, to still be competitive about something. And I'm guessing that's probably a big part of why you sort of had success in that season.
Yeah, we did, and I've written about it and talked about this before. How we measure success in amateur sport is skewed. We've gone through pre-COVID level 8 and 9 clubs paying players and things like that. This whole system has, I think one thing COVID has done is it's made everyone go, we can't afford to be paying players at these levels. We have to change the way we do. We run rugby. Do you know what I mean? And I think that success, that measure of success is, someone said it years ago, and I'd love to be able to quote them because I use this so often, is the measure of success at grassroots rugby is that more people come back the week after. You know, that's the only measure. And
yeah,
you know, this season has been more challenging than last season for me at Bletchley, but I think that's because, again, we've had this weather runoffs and cry-offs, and it's just been another tough season, really, but better than last season results-wise.
yeah. I mean, you mentioned this, I think, in the article about how you've tried to strive for better performances and you've tried to get, a more winning season, and maybe that hasn't led to more fun in the end. Is that the case?
Yeah, I was very conscious sort of halfway through. I'm going away from that ethos that we set out last year that everyone enjoyed, but I tried to put more structure in place as well, because I was aware that these new players, and there's still more new players coming in, they need the comfort of some structure. My whole coaching philosophy, I suppose, has changed from the beginning. When you start out, you draw these maps and session plans, and you write everything down, you research everything online, and then you realize, kind of, actually, I've done a whole session about how the hookers are going to work, and then none of your hookers turn up, and you start to adapt more. You start to go, actually, I need to change this session. I need to have tools in my pocket that I can develop other things, and I can go off and do other things. I'll set up a whole scrum week. I'm not that I'm obsessed with scrummaging, but say I would set something up that was built around the forwards, and of course you get 2 forwards turn up and you get 13 backs. Well, then you've got to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, you can plan as much as you like as a grassroots coach, but being adaptable is definitely the skill to have. Now, this is something, the next thing I'm going to ask you about is something that I'm not sure if I even considered when I was coaching. Afterwards, I did, but not actually during the time. I was too sort of focused on just getting stuff done. But this is the point about accepting that not every player will sort of like or enjoy your coaching style. So,
Yeah.
when did that sort of thought first come to you?
That thought came to me many years ago. Over the years, I've worked with some really, really talented players, and across both spectrums, some that are really hard to coach and some that are really easy to coach. And actually, as a coach, I've made mistakes with some of those people in trying to make them players they weren't, or not players they weren't, I didn't coach to their strengths. I coach to the missing bits. And that's something that really resonates with me now when I go, I wish I could have a chance with those players again to say to them, do you know what? I actually ruined our relationship because I wanted you to do something that you weren't comfortable with. And I should have said to you, you're really good at this. Keep doing it. We'll build around that,
Yeah, Carl, that resonates so strongly with me. That is basically how I coached. I was
Yeah.
always trying to fix faults rather than build on super strengths. And even the top players, even the professional players, a lot of them have got areas of their game which are a subpar essentially. But they're so good at the things they are good at, then that carries them through.
Yeah. And I think this is something that's really important for coaches to understand, is that you can ruin a super strength by going after the weakness, and you make players doubt themselves when they shouldn't doubt themselves. And it's so important that, above all, we just give them confidence. Do you know what I mean? Make them feel like they can do it. Whatever they're good at, just everyone's got something.
Yeah, it's funny. You can talk about the technical and the tactical, but the emotional side of it is probably more important. I would say, especially at grassroots level.
Massive. It's so important. And I like to think, as the years have gone by, I've started to think more emotionally about my players, as in terms of what they want and what they need as individuals. It's hard at grassroots to coach the individual because you have so little time. So reaching out to players individually is something that's significantly harder than it is at, if you're coaching at a higher level, because you have that much more time. You can pull someone away and you talk to them individually. So I try to, I know there's some players now. I've started to know that there's the players where I can go, that isn't good enough to them, but I'm out of the way of other people, because I think they'd be scared if I did that with them. But I know the players that I can do it with,
Yeah, and that comes down to, again, one of the sort of biggest skills of coaching, isn't it? That you have to know your players and how they'll react to certain things.
Yeah, and I still don't get it right. I can still get it wrong, and I talk about the challenge of there is a difference of coaching men and women, in that I mean, it's maybe my problem rather than their problem, in that I coach men differently than I coach women. In that I'll coach men and I will be a lot more brutal and a lot more blunt. And I know there is women that can deal with that in the teams I've coached, but I also know there's ones that wouldn't take that, and men, when you coach men, I hate to sound whitewash one, but they're a bit more, the ego is bigger. So you say to a man, run into a wall, they'll run into a wall, and the next man will run into a wall, even if that man's split his head open. If I say to a woman, run into the wall, the first thing she goes, why would I do that? Why am I going to do that? And coaching women makes you a better coach, because they will ask you questions that really challenge you. And they challenge your depth of understanding.
That's interesting. So is that happening like all the time, every session, or how often?
I will get questions that I could never ever prepare for when I set something up, and it's I know the difference is now is like, if you look at the elite end of the women's game now, is those women have far more early introduction to rugby. So those bits that were missing 10 years, 15 years ago are no longer missing, because they have been introduced to rugby from a young age. They understand the tactical nuances of it. I worked with two brilliant coaches at Chesham, Cat Merchant and Rocky Clark. And, I learned so much from them as coaches, because they understood the game better than anyone at that club, and they transformed our rugby club, and I was able to absorb what they were doing and what they were bringing. And, I learned so much from them. It was fascinating.
That's a really interesting point you've made there about the girls and women now have all of that time to pick up the nuances of the game and the amount of how the game moves, where the space is, the amount of time you have on the ball in certain situations. And I think you're right. It just takes years and years of seeing that picture over and over again for it to sink in and be able to perform at the top level.
Yeah. And, the days of, girls not finding rugby until they go to university are changed now. There's pathways right the way through from 15, 16, all of that now.
Yeah. Now, one of the other things you mentioned in terms of coaching is fixing tactical or technical things. And in a team at, most levels, to be honest, there's always more than you can probably deal with. So what's your approach in terms of that?
Well, I think you have to sacrifice sometimes those individual needs to go, look, this, our issue's been this season defensively. Defensively we've been pretty weak, and so for the last 3 or 4 sessions, I've just focused on defense. Now, I can work on an individual. I'm going off on a tangent now. One of the things that I've become really conscious of is I want to be a coach, not a choreographer. Do you know what I mean? And modern day coaching is so shape and pattern orientated that you coach people to where to stand rather than what to do. And that's become something that I've become so focused on trying to avoid. That's why my resistance to structure came from. I want to coach people to make a decision for them, rather than that's the right decision, rather than because they've been told to stand there because they're number 5 out of the back of a line out. and
Yeah.
and coaching people in when you have an hour and a half with a team a week, and probably you only get then 10 of the 15 that are playing that Sunday, you've got to go, right, what can I work on here that I can touch on? I mean, the girls will tell you I infuriate them, because on a Sunday morning, on a Sunday of a game, I'll come up with a random line-out move and I'll say, right, we're going to do this. And they're like, oh, God, I don't. My thing is, we don't get the time to do it, so we have to do it now. Give it a try, And I'm a bit maverick. I've come up with some things that people go, you can't try. It just doesn't. It will never work. I had this obsession with a 4-man line out. I said, we're going to do a 4-man line out. I said, no team we play against will have ever seen a 4-man line out. We go to the first game. The first line out, the opposition called 4-man. And I was like, and everyone just looked at me and went, yeah, well, this is your fault.
That's hilarious. What are the chances? Now, I'm going back to something you said then. I want to be a coach, not a choreographer. You can make T-shirts with that on, Karl, I should think.
Yeah, it's just so important. We get sucked into pods and pistons and 5-3, and there's coaches out there that I have so much admiration for. He's like Russell Earnshaw, people like that who do these, the card stuff, and they inspire me because they're able to think outside the box. They're able to go, how do we challenge people and how do we make people think more? And I look at rugby clubs now and they spend money on VO cameras and things like that, and I'm like, could your money be put better use spending more money on coaching courses and developing coaches and these things? And I've got a real bugbear about it, because to me, at grassroots level, if your players aren't reviewing the video, don't have the video, because otherwise you're just having a VO camera is just creating more work for yourself as a coach.
Yeah, completely.
Be careful of names and you might need it. But you understand what I mean? Is it's and that's why, and I noticed there's now these adverts for these GPSs and for grassroots, and I'm like, grassroots rugby doesn't need a GPS. It needs people to be able to pass and catch, and that's where it comes from for me. And that's why, I'm, I look at where my life was before I found rugby, and I'm so passionate about sending that back to people to make them feel those same things that I felt. And rugby was simpler when I started. It wasn't as complex as it seems to be now. And that's something that I think as coaches, certainly at grassroots, we've got to change those behaviours. We've got to be at the forefront of changing how we approach the game.
Yeah, I think I'm guessing, Karl, it certainly was the case when I was coaching, that people just look upwards, don't they? They see the professional game and they go, what are they doing? What can we copy from there that we can use? And too often, in my opinion anyway, we copy or try and copy far too much, and it's typically not relevant at the grassroots level.
Yeah, and I go back to Rocky and Kat when they came to us. They were in the England team and they were preparing for the 2010 World Cup when they started with us. And they went through to the 2014 World Cup, and obviously they were in an elite environment, even though it was amateur at that time, and they struggled, I think, to deal with the amateurism of our setup. Now, they made us 10 times more professional than we ever were, but I think at times they struggled with the fact that Dave would cry off on a Wednesday night because his wife wanted him to do something, or Tuesday night, and those things, because it was like, this is rugby and we've got to be here, and it's like, yeah, you have, but and this is something where I've really changed my attitude now, is that if someone turns up with only 20 minutes left on a session, I'm grateful for them coming. I'm not mad at them for not being there at the start. To me, if you've given up and you've turned up for 20 minutes, fair play to you, because you've gone out of your way where it's been very easy to just go, I'm only going to make 20 minutes, might as well go home, and that's where we have to change, because the pull and modern life is just dramatic for people. It pulls people in all over the place, and rugby should be an escape. It shouldn't be a punishment.
Yeah, for sure. And it's very tricky though in the kind of serious social sort of area of the game where there's lots of players who take it really seriously and want to improve and want to get better. But at the same time, there's lots of players who can play at that same level who it is just an escape. It is just seeing your mates. It is just running around a little bit. So balancing that as a coach is probably a very big challenge.
Really challenging. It's really challenging. And actually, you make an interesting point there, and one that one thing I found in my amateur rugby is that the most talented players want to make the least effort. Do you understand? I mean, because it's easy for them. For me, rugby was hard for me. I had to train. I had to learn the game and understand it. But there's really good players, and they're so good that they can drift in and out. They can miss 2 sessions and come back and win a player of the match award. And they're the ones that are actually the most frustrating, because you're like, oh, if you trained with us every week and if you were available every week, we'd be in a different position.
Yeah, and it would probably influence all the other players as well, I'd imagine, if they saw the best players training and working really hard every week too. Let's move on to something slightly different now as well then, Karl. I understand you've just done the RFU mentoring course. So I'd love to hear a bit about that and how you hope to use it in the future.
Yeah, I think the coaching courses, I think one of the biggest strengths, the coaching courses the RFU do are brilliant, I think. And I think they've really thought some through. Bucks County here have done some really good ones. They did the leadership program, which was another really good one. And, they've impacted me in terms of my work life as well, and making, some of those things have been really good for me as an individual. And I think that the mentoring one, I was kind of slipping into that role anyway. That was my dream, actually, to mentor someone to take this role on that I've got at the moment. And although that didn't quite work out, that mentoring role is so important to keep people coming, to keep people inspired, and to go, actually, although I'm drifting out of my love of it, I'm still passionate about the game and its influence on people, and that's what I hope that I can pass on with it. It's been a really good course.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are some of the things that you've learned? Can you sort of pull out any sort of specifics?
I think it's just about that bit about making sure you don't do all the work for people. It's about finding out, about helping them to sort themselves out, helping them to go, right, this is the path I want to go on. How do I get there? And you guide them to where they can find those resources, where they can find that help, and just chatting through with them. What are the weaknesses? What are the threats that you're going to face? I was working with a brilliant young coach, a young girl called Lil, and I think hopefully she comes back into it. But we were in the middle of this. She was the one that I was hoping would take on the role, but she got a dream job and it was in London, and you can't argue that. That's your chance you've had your chance to have your dream job. Well, that's got to be your priority, But it's about saying, and that was the thing. That was the risk for her. That was the risk to her coaching, was that, well, actually, I might find something that pulls me away and my time.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's a classic example of how grassroots clubs can struggle at times with the people that they, were potentially not relying on, but had sort of eyed up for a future, and then something takes them away, and it's a constant roundabout of things like that, I guess.
I think there's so many challenges. You look at the number of things that, where we have games cried off now more and more often. And I was talking to someone the other day and I said, what would be a really good idea is if teams got involved with their local opposition, the local rival. Everyone team's got a local rival, haven't they? And you say, actually, what we're going to do in our twos team or one of our fringe teams is we're going to have a 3-match test series. You know, we're going to play each other 3 times, and that gives you 3 fixtures. It doesn't matter if we only have 10 players each or 12 players each. We're going to fulfill those 3 fixtures. Well, you've got 3 fixtures that you're going to get in your diary, aren't you? And people love the local rivalries. They love the derbies. They love and you start to develop. We need to localize more, you know, and go back to those things that made rugby so enjoyable, which was people just going out and playing against the local rival. And, you know, yeah, you may end up playing the same team 3 times, but hey, you know where it is. You know it's not far. You know you can come back to the clubhouse. You know, I think there's some really interesting things there.
That's a great idea, Karl. I think that's a brilliant idea because players will really enjoy that. I think just the idea that this is one game, but it's a part of a bigger story, and also it just deepened those connections between the 2 clubs as well.
Yeah, and you end up like you play for a trophy, don't you? You know, you play for the road name, or you play for, you know, a pair of pants or something. You know, something. You know, there's something there that you can do. You know, and it becomes then that becomes an event every year. Oh, it's the test series coming up. It's the test match. You know, and I just think that there's so many ways you can go with these sort of things. You know, you only say if you had 5 local rivals, and you did the same thing with, say you had 4 local rivals, you'd say, well, you've got, what, 15 fixtures, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
yeah, for sure. I think that's a brilliant idea. So moving forwards, though, Karl, what are you going to be doing with your Tuesday, Thursday nights, Saturday afternoons?
I don't know. I imagine something's going to come up that's going to pique my interest, and I'll be going. I'm going to watch a bit more rugby. You know, I've got really into the Prem 15s, the women's Premier 15s. I think it's a great product, and you know, even the women's Six Nations that's going on now. The women's game is exploding, and it's going to carry the men's game, I think, for some time into the future. And I'm deeply passionate about the women's game. I've been, because of that environment I was brought into, of a club that had a women's team 25 years ago or 23 years ago. I saw the impact that rugby had on women. And if you look at the pressures on young girls now on body image and all of that, you know, you look at that England team, and there's every type in that England team, of every shape, of every size, of every type you could imagine, and they're great ambassadors for young girls. And we need to really push that and show the positivity of that sport. You know, like I said, you know, rugby saved me, and there's countless people out there that I believe it can save as well. And in the women's game, I think the impact that these young players can have on women and girls is so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening already, Karl, isn't it? With Twickenham soon to be, I'm not sure, it's a record number of tickets they've sold for the France game coming up. The target's to sell it out for the World Cup final, which, frankly, I can't see any way that's not going to happen.
No, I can't either. And, you know, I talk about this, you know, I think in 2010, I went to Esher to watch England women play the All Blacks. And I think there was probably 500 people there. And probably all of them were related or knew one of the players. Now,
interestingly, Karl, I was one of those people.
Were you? Amazing.
Yeah, I was at the same game because I was playing for Esher at the time. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, we knew it was on, so we went and supported.
Yeah. Well, you've proved that wasn't the case. There was people there that didn't know, but I go now, and you know, and you used to talk to the players after the game. Now they're swamped, and they take so much time. They sign everything, and you know, I just sit in awe, and I just go, you know, I sit and watch these, and I'm just like, this is such a good, positive role models for young women and girls, you know, and I just wish everyone could get on board with it, and they are starting to now. People are starting to see it and the growth of it.
Yeah, what's impressing me is that it's quite not easy to do that, but easier when the sport's smaller. but now it's getting to a very considerable size in terms of attendances and things like that. And the women playing are still just as attentive to the fans, still hanging around to get all the photos and all the autographs after the game. So it's impressive.
Well, I went to Emily Scarrett's 100th cap at Leicester, and she was after the game. She was trying to, and she was getting swamped by people, and I was just like, it's amazing, and it's like there comes a point where they're going to have to say we've got to skimp this back. You can't have people stood there for 2 hours post game. But I think they rightfully they enjoy it, and it's part of the whole thing. But that was one of those moments where Leicester really embraced that women's game. Exeter have been massively embracing it. It's growing. I do have fears that they follow the men's game, and as we can see in the men's game, there's massive issues that the women's game needs to be aware of and avoid following.
Yeah, for sure. Now onto a slightly different subject. There's rumor of a book. Tell me what this might be, Karl.
Well, no, this is kind of like a whim, and I've had this desire to write a book basically for amateur coaches, and I called it the Solving the Puzzle, and it puts community coaching into the equivalent of a jigsaw puzzle, but you get this jigsaw puzzle in a box, and there's no image on the cover of what you've got to find. Half the pieces are missing, and it's about how you create something with what you've got there, and it's about one of the key bits I talk about in the early part of it is finding your corners. What are the values that you have? We talk about coaching philosophies a lot, and actually I think probably you need to have coaching values that you don't move from, but you need to have a philosophy that's flexible, because rugby changes and things change. So you need to be flexible in your philosophy, but your values are those four corners. What are the bits that are important to you? And they could even change sometimes as well. I understand that, but you have to pin out what you are and be authentic. That I know we talk about this a lot, but you have to be authentic with who you are. And that's how you inspire people, because we're all different. And, like I said about not being a choreographer, we don't want to be a coach by the numbers,
Yeah, completely. It sounds like a very interesting book, and it could be very valuable as well. So once you've written it and it's ready for publishing, we'll have you back on the show and we can talk about it some more.
It may be more a pamphlet than a book.
Either way, I'm sure it'll still be great. Okay, let's move on to the stash section of the show. What's your favorite bit of stash that you've ever received?
Do you know what? This is a really hard one for me, because I've always bought my own stash because but I actually think that I've got this raincoat that the Bletchley team gave, and it's so good. It's so warm, and it's literally been a lifesaver for me this year when I feel like I feel like it rains every session and every game. And this has been my lifesaver. So I would say probably this year's Bletchley raincoat has been my best find.
Lovely, nice. Okay, and what about your favourite kit of all time? So this can be any team from any era.
I think the Stade Francais Pink Lily shirt. It's just I tried to buy one, but they didn't have it in my size, and I looked like a sort of sausage that had been squeezed into it. So I thought, I did that. I'll lose some weight, and I thought, no, it's just not. But I have to say, I also one of my all-time favorite shirts that I ever bought was for the Lions Tour 2005, and it was a split All Blacks Lions shirt. So it had the All Blacks on one side, and it was split. And Adidas made it, and it's a great shirt. It's so good. It's still always if I wear it, people still talk about it. They say, "Oh, that's a great shirt. Where did you get that from?"
Nice. Okay, cool. And what about awful kits? Are there any kits out there that you hate at the moment you'd rather throw in the bin?
That Exeter sort of violent pink one is, not something that I'm a fan. They look like 15 referees. You know, it's like that referee shirt.
Yeah, that's true. It is a very bright pink, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, that would be.
Okay, cool. Now we're coming to a close here now, but have you got any sort of final thoughts or anything else you'd like to say?
No, I just think that, you know, we're at an important point in rugby now, and as community coaches reaching out to players and young players, again, I'm going to quote someone that I can't remember who said it, but you know, you're far more likely to coach a player that will become a really important member of your rugby club than you are becomes an international player. And that's the bit that we have to remember when we're coaching, is you have to teach people to love the game and love the club and love the environment. And that's the bit that's important, really.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Okay, Karl, if people want to get a hold of you at all, what is the best way for them to do that?
Probably would be Twitter, sort of my at top of the props handle.
That's a great handle.
Yeah. It's a Twitter feed that goes off in all random directions, so please bear with me. I try to talk about rugby, but sometimes get drugged in current events.
And if people want to get a hold of Bletchley, what's the best way of them to do that?
I think that's also like, is that Twitter? There is a Twitter, I think, but there's Instagram as well. I think Bletchley.
Yeah, it's at Bletchley RUFC on Twitter, I believe. And Chesham, was that a Facebook page?
There is a Facebook page for Chesham Rugby Club, and they've got a good Instagram page. I think just probably better searching for Chesham Rugby Club and Bletchley Rugby Club. And Bletchley Ladies, I think they're down as, or Bletchley Women's Rugby Club. It sounds like I don't know anything about these teams, but I do. But yeah, they're worth a look. They're both great rugby clubs.
Okay, amazing. So what we'll do is we are going to link up everything that we've mentioned today in the show notes, which you can find in one place, and that's at the amateurrugbypodcast.com. So that just leaves me, Karl, to say thank you so much for your time. It's been a really interesting and fun conversation today.
Thank you very much. Nice to speak to you. Thanks for having
me. Okay, there he goes. Karl, thank you very much for that. That was I think it's a really important conversation, and I'm going to encourage people to go and read your article. It's going to be linked in the show notes. So go and give that a read if you're involved in the community game at all, because there's a lot of very good points in there. Now, what did you think of last week's episode with Paul Cranston from Jed Forest? Paul's just a wonderful man, full of great company when I was up there, and he tells some great stories about Roy Laylor as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, though, and you can contact me on email, which is hello@amateurrugbypodcast.com. And I'll have another fantastic guest for you next week. Not sure who it's going to be yet, but we'll deal with that next week. I've been making plenty of videos over on YouTube dealing with some of the current events in the game, all the way from the international level, and we're going to be talking about the Community Cup rugby in England this week with the Papa John's Cup. That's going to come out tomorrow, so go and check that out over on YouTube. And if you wish to support the podcast, then you can do so at patreon.com/amateur rugby podcast. Now, if you've enjoyed this show, then you can rate and review on your podcast player, share, like, retweet, all that jazz. But what I'd really like is if you mention it to someone in person the next time you're down your local rugby club. So until then, get out and play.